Hello everyone, welcome back to the UnchartedX podcast. This is Ben, it's the 2nd of July 2021 and this is episode 18 of the UnchartedX podcast. I hope you're all doing well. I've got a podcast today that is my interview with Chris Dunn. This is a video that is on my YouTube channel, you may have seen it already, but this was a great interview with Chris. We got into a lot of topics. Obviously he's somebody that I reference quite a bit in my work. I was very, very pleased to get the chance to speak with him. If you don't know who Chris is, then stand by. I give a pretty thorough introduction to Chris and his work at the start of this video. But before we go to that, just a few housekeeping items, I guess, as we're heading into summer here in 2021. I want to let everybody know about the upcoming trips that I'll be on. If you're interested in joining me in September, I'm going to be going with Randall Carlson once again to the Contact at the Cabin or the Contact at the Cataracts event up in the Scablands, the channeled Scablands of Eastern Washington State. I think that trip is filling up fast. There is a few spots left. I think at this point, you can find all of the details for that. It's at contactatthecabin.com/Carlson. And yeah, that should be a good trip. I was on that trip with those guys in May. I attended that one. It was a great time, fantastic group of people, and just a really eye-opening experience, and having Randall there to explain kind of the mega flood landscapes of the channeled Scablands, which are absolutely spectacular. It was just a massive bonus. Also, in October, I am running my annual Egypt trip. It's you can find all the details for this at unchartedx.com/tour. This trip has kind of been sold out for quite a while, but we did just recently add a few extra spots to it. And from what I understand, there are a couple of seats available. So if you are interested in getting on board with this, the trip in October, then please do check it out and follow the links there to register and talk to the Comet School. This should be a fantastic trip. The one we did last year was just epic. I've got a couple of extra little surprises planned on this trip, which is going to be a lot of fun for everyone when they're there, I think. And if you can't make it this year in October, never fear. We are already in the midst of planning, in fact, maybe a couple of trips for 2022, including working with guys like Randall. There's going to be possibly a few collaborative things going on next year as well. So yeah, no worries if you can't make this particular trip. Also in August, coming up in a month, I'm actually going to be down in South America. I think this trip might already be sold out, but I'm joining Brian Forrester and Jimmy from the Bright Insight channel down in South America for a couple of weeks in Peru and Bolivia, getting to see a bunch of sites that I haven't seen down there, things like the Nazca lines. So I'll be producing a bunch of content coming out from that. And hopefully you'll find that interesting and entertaining. Also, last little bit of housekeeping before I before I play the interview, I guess, with Chris Dunn, is that I have begun streaming quite a bit on Twitch. So it's a good chance to get in and interact. We do a lot of review of raw footage of these sites. We spend a lot of time talking with chat, getting in and getting into specific sites. Often people will ask questions and we'll then dive down a rat hole of looking at all the material I have on particular sites or topics. I also do a lot of video editing. In fact, I'm recording this podcast intro right now, live on stream in front of about 30 people in the channel. So if you're interested in that, you can check me out on Twitch. It's twitch.tv/UnchartedX. And I stream live every Tuesdays, Fridays, and Sundays, and then often in between those dates as well. So anyway, I hope you enjoy this podcast. Sorry it's been a little bit of a wait between podcasts. I do have another one, bonus one, that I hope to get out for July 4th. And in any case, I hope you enjoy the interview, and I'll catch you in the next one. Cheers. It leads me to another question, which is, when you look at these huge single-piece objects, particularly the ones that deal in complex curved surfaces, do you have any speculation as to the tools that could have been used to make this? Are we talking about things like giant lathes or 3D milling machines?
Well, I think there's evidence that they were using massive lathes to create their artifacts. There's evidence of that in the Cairo Museum.
Hello all, my name's Ben, welcome back to UnchartedX, and today I'm very happy to bring you a podcast with someone that I've wanted to speak with for quite some time, and that is engineer and author Christopher Dunn. Chris has an extensive background as a craftsman, with nearly 50 years experience working at every level of high-tech and precision manufacturing, in particular in the laser and aerospace industries. In 1977, Chris developed a passion for ancient Egypt, and over the ensuing decades combined this passion with his professional expertise and wrote 2 books that investigate the evidence for ancient technology that is contained in the structures and the objects that come to us from our distant past. I think that these books, both 1998's The Giza Power Plant and 2010's Lost Technologies of Ancient Egypt, should be recognised as amongst the most important and pivotal works on ancient civilizations in our time. I consider Chris, with his pragmatic and engineering-focused approach, to be the modern-day successor to the works of the great Sir William Flinders Petrie, and I've featured both Chris and Petrie's work in several of my documentaries, notably those dealing with precision, as well as my full-length feature on the tube drills of ancient Egypt, and you'll find links to those in the description box below this video. This podcast was a real treat for me, and I want to sincerely thank Chris for granting me some of his time. We cover a lot of topics in our talk, and I've added in some video and images in spots to help illustrate some of the points, and I very much hope you enjoy the discussion. Well, hello everyone, and welcome back to UnchartedX. I am just delighted to say that I'm being joined by Christopher Dunn today. I'm a huge fan of your work, Chris, and welcome to the show. It's great to have you here.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, Ben.
Yeah, it's something that I've been looking forward to for quite some time. I do want to say, kind of right off the bat, that obviously I'm just a huge fan of your work. I've featured you in several of my videos. I don't think you'll be any stranger to the folks that watch my content. I think you've done so much to kind of advance the field in terms of evaluating the engineering that goes into some of these ancient technologies and shining a light on the complexity of some of the things that we look at. And yeah, I just want to say thanks for your work. I mean, I think it should be considered, and I hope it will be considered as just some of the most important works that have been done on Egyptology and ancient civilizations.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
It's great.
Yeah. And I just did want to mention also just thanks to NEXT, because he's a fellow researcher and content creator, and he's a great guy. I haven't had the chance to meet him in person yet, but he's connected us, and so thanks NEXT for doing that. Yeah,
thanks. Next is a great guy. I met him in California at the CPAC conference, and I was really impressed with him.
Yeah, I'll get him on my show at some point too. I'd hope, but I think there's a lot of I have a lot of questions for you, and in fact, my audience has also submitted some great topics and some things that we'll get into. But I thought a good place to start might be just to try and draw a line to what first triggered your interest in this space, into researching and discovering all of the precision and the engineering that's involved in all of these ancient monuments, because it seems like a long line. You work in the engineering space, making precision parts for the aerospace industry and things like that, and then from going to that to writing books about ancient Egypt is, I imagine that's an interesting path.
Well, yes, it was. It has been a very rewarding, and I don't know. I suppose it's interesting to a lot of people. But I will take you back to when I first started to study this subject. That was in 1977. I was working as a tool and die maker in Indianapolis, and but I was also very interested in philosophy, particularly world religions and and the whole New Age kind of movement, which I kind of brushed against. Yep. And found some really lovely people. But I was in friends of mine were running a philosophy class in Canby, Indiana. And you might say, well, where's that? Well, it's just about 10 miles south of Indianapolis. But they had a metaphysical bookstore, and they would run philosophy classes where groups would meet. There'd be a reading from a book, and then there would be a meditation period. But in that bookstore was a book by Peter Tompkins called Secrets of the Great Pyramid. And that book fascinated me. It was expensive at the time, about $20. But I sprung the $20 and bought the book, and it laid on my shelf for I don't know, a month, and then one night I went home from work and I just picked it up and I just started to study it in detail, and so it inspired me to try to figure out what was going on in the ancient world, ancient Egypt, or even pre-existing cultures, which we are now beginning to talk about a lot more widely and frequently. But the question in my mind was, how does a primitive culture develop to such a point where their state of the art at the time, in some cases, exceeds our own? My focus was really on the Great Pyramid and that particular structure, studying that. And then, of course, the name that came up, the source material that came up was William Flinders Petrie.
Yeah.
And so as I was going through the bibliography of the book and ticking off the books that I needed to buy, and making a few calls, I found that there was a copy of Pyramids and Temples of Giza in the Indianapolis Library, the State Library in Indianapolis. So I made a trip to Indianapolis and I made a photocopy. I bought a photocopy of it, and so I had a permanent copy in my library. And so reading through that. That's how I connected with Petrie's work, and of course, with my profession at the time, it really resonated with me because of his focus on the impossible work that was being done, and the lack of tools to explain it.
Right.
And of course, that. I've kind of amplified that over the years, but reading his chapter on the mechanical methods of the ancient Egyptians, and him referencing the use of lathes, the use of circular saws, flat saws, and other kind of methods, which hole drilling is the big one.
Yeah.
And you produced an excellent documentary on that.
Thank you.
And so, Petrie really resonated with me. And so as I continued on in my research, I was writing a book called The Giza Power Plant. It came to me one night, and it took 21 years to actually get it published.
Wow.
But yeah, so it was like, what's going on here? And then my passion, my focus became the Great Pyramid. I had to try and figure out, what was going on, because here you had a very precise structure, the most precise structure on the planet that was supposedly built 4,500 years ago. And yet there are no tools to explain how it came to be. But the part that really interested me was the precision. And that really, it boggles the mind when you consider how precise the Great Pyramid is. It's been there. Everybody knows it. The casing stones have been removed, but the few that are left, Petrie measured and found that they were within half the thickness of a thumbnail of being perfectly flat, and so that that's significant.
Certainly is.
But then looking at the schematics of the inside, it looked more like a machine than it did a structure for human habitation, whether alive or deceased.
Right.
It just didn't make sense to me. And then, of course, as I was pondering that, and I was reading the opinions of other researchers in the past, it seemed like that there was an overriding question about the Great Pyramid. And the question was, what it was its true purpose, because in general, the people who were asking that question did not believe the tomb theory and argued against it for many, many different reasons. I mean, obviously, the lack of evidence, there's no doubt. But then also the explanation by Egyptologists about the different features within the Great Pyramid.
Yeah, like it's a mistake or something. That just you can't build a structure like that and make it up on the fly, right? It's not like, oh, we don't like the Queen's Chamber, let's build another one over here. Yeah.
Yeah, right. And so there's all these anomalies. There are these unusual shafts that run up in different directions, and so that all of that I thought needed an explanation, and that the explanation would be a technical explanation rather than, saying, well, maybe it was a initiation chamber, or maybe it was built symbolically to point to certain stars, or things like that. Which I read those, and some of them are interesting, but I kind of rejected it because in all cases the individual theories they don't address all the evidence, and so it's kind of like, well, this theory will work for maybe the Queen's Chamber or maybe the subterranean chamber, but it doesn't work when you get up into the Grand Gallery and into the King's Chamber and all the features there. So that was the problem, in my opinion. And I thought, well, if I could come up with an explanation that actually explained all the features and all the features that actually fit into this explanation, then I'd make a lot of people happy,
Indeed.
and it's amazing though the response. I mean, the people who had the other alternate theories, they kind of rejected mine, and continued on with theirs, which is fine. But but that's what got me started, and then since then, my career kind of developed and evolved, and went into engineering. I ran a laser job shop in Indianapolis for a period of time in the early 80s, and then I was hired by an aerospace manufacturing company in Danville, Illinois. And so I retired from there a few years ago. I worked there for 27 years. Right. So it's been a very fruitful career. And, I knew that I wasn't going to make a good living writing books. Considering it took me 21 years to write the first one.
Right. Yeah, I feel you there with YouTube and things like that. But yes, yeah. No, that's amazing. Yeah, in fact, the Great Pyramid's an interesting topic. I was going to touch on it a little later on, but seeing as we're talking about it, I'm interested in your theory. I know I've discussed this in a couple other places, but all of the recent new work that's been happening around the Great Pyramid, the Scan Pyramids project, as well as the recent robotics effort to send another robot up the shaft in the Queen's Chamber to take a look at what's behind that door. And sort of look at the back side of the door that's at the end of the shaft. So how do those fit into your theory? I mean, for me, your theory is exactly as you said. It's really the only one that accounts for all of the features in the Great Pyramid without kind of, as you say, these exceptions of where things work for one thing and things work for the other. I mean, I agree with the idea that, I mean, to me, everywhere, every ancient culture, whatever they did, no matter the evidence, it seems like our Egyptology or archaeological establishment will generally always classify things as symbolic or ritual spaces, just because that's, the idea of things being functional isn't really in the books, because they're looking at those, I guess we would still call them primitive civilizations, and thinking, well, they weren't operating on this functional level, they weren't creating machines, but again, the evidence kind of, when you look at it, suggests something else. So do these new efforts, I'm sure you followed those, some of the developments in that space, the idea about the new voids in the Great Pyramid, how do those fit in with your work?
Very nicely, actually. And basically, fundamentally, if you like propose a theory or a hypothesis, and new information is revealed, if it doesn't fit with your theory, you either accommodate it or and change your theory, right, or the theory has to be thrown out.
Right.
And so when the Scam Pyramid project results came out, I was asked, well, what do you think of this new void? And my state of mind at the time was, the resolution of what has been revealed seems to be fairly low.
Yeah.
And I think a physical exploration would be good to actually gather data about the true geometry of and dimensions of what they had discovered. Mm-hmm. So, and that was pretty much my opinion on that. And then I got a call from a Rolls-Royce engineer in Indianapolis, Eric Wilson, great guy, and he said, "Hey, I was just accessing this Scam Pyramid data," and he says, "I know what that's for." And I said, "Do tell." And so he said, "Well, the thing is that I'd always," and he had claimed that the Giza power plant theory was lacking in that there was no preamplification of the microwave signal coming through the northern shaft.
Right.
And he said this void is located right near the northern shaft, in a place where if you wanted to place a preamp, then that would be the perfect place for it. And so right now I'm saying it's not conclusive, but it's very, very attractive and enticing.
Yeah.
And it doesn't really dispel what I have previously written.
That's interesting, isn't it? It does fit right. It seems to fit right in that space. And I mean, I hope that there is going to be that physical exploration of these spaces, and hopefully the public in general will get to see the results, and not within, not decades later, but when it happens, that would be.
I mean, here we are. Here I am, decades later.
Yeah.
But the other, I mean, you mentioned the Queen's Chamber shafts, and those explorations, they took almost a couple of decades.
It did. Yeah.
You had the original exploration in 1993 by Rudolf Gantenbrink, where he came across this blockage in the shaft, and before then nobody knew where the shaft went to.
Yeah.
They'd looked on the outside of the pyramid for the termination of these shafts and couldn't find them, and so he runs his robot up the southern shaft and comes across this blockage that had two pins coming through it. I was watching a documentary with a friend of mine, and I'd already established, or I had a theory on what the shafts were for, based on just the fact that there is a shaft and that the shafts did not complete, they were not completed into the Queen's Chamber space. There was like a 5-inch block, 5 inches of material in the wall block, and so I had theorized that the only thing that would pass through that would be some form of liquid, and this was what before I had actually finished writing my book. And my friend turned to me, Jeff Summers, who's a great guy, and he turned to me and he said, "Well, they look like electrodes."
Yeah.
And of course, I'm like, "Well, yeah, bingo."
Yeah.
And so that's where in my book I describe the function of what I call a fluid switch.
Yeah. And you in fact, You correct me if I'm wrong here, but my understanding was that you essentially predicted what they would find behind that door, which would be another void, and the other. And the other, I guess there's another wall back there behind that. But that's what I had heard, that you're based on your theory, you had predicted that that's what when they drilled through that wall, that at the end of the shaft, that's what they would find, another void, and then
and the interesting thing is that when they tested the thickness of the door with an ultrasonic thickness tester, and they found that it was 3.25 inches thick. And in my book, I illustrated that to be around 3.64 inches. So
close.
I knew the door didn't have to be, that thick in order for it to function. Yeah. But then I also predicted that eventually they would find a continuation of cabling or something where there would be a connection made to some kind of device that would detect the discontinuity when the fluid dropped below the level of the pins. But when they drilled through in 2002, they didn't find that because their camera was one directional. It was like an endoscopic camera, which just looked straight ahead. And I think it was like they had a fisheye view of the back of it. But then in 2010, they did another exploration with what they call the Jedi robot, which had an articulating camera. And they took photographs of the back of this so-called door, and they saw how the pins actually looped around and were locked in place in a hole at the back.
That's right.
And there are several articles, updates on my website, gizapower.com, that detail, those explorations and what was discovered, and what I thought the significance of the discoveries were. Yeah. But the other thing that the Jedi robot detected was the markings on the floor behind. Yeah, and there was a bit of consternation about what those meant, because they thought that there was some kind of Mason marks. And when I looked at them, I saw them as a wiring diagram, or electrical symbols, if you will. You have a twisted pair, and then two kind of, it looks like a number 5 that's crudely scratched in there. Mm-hmm. And so I saw that perhaps they were using them as connectors. And I created a replica of the door. It's a full-size replica, and equipped it with similar pins that curl around and lock into place, which is actually quite a brilliant design. But I did it with plexiglass.
Yeah.
But if you look at the photographs, you'll see that when you look at the back side of the pins, you have erosion on one of the pins, like you would on a battery. So the electricity was flowing from the cathode to anode, right?
that explains it. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, that was the exploration of the southern shaft, and maybe they'll do another one. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not sure if is that the same robot that's, I think the recent documentary that's just come out. I know it's on the Ancient Architects channel. It's called the Dentist, the Robot, and the Pyramid. I'm not sure if that's the same robot or not, but it takes that it's video footage of I think it probably is, of them looking around with the camera that curves and takes a look at the backside of the wall. It's a documentary that's only just been released this year. It was the team was led by a guy out of Hong Kong who was a dentist who literally beat down Zahi Hawass's door, but just persistently bothered them until they let him do this experiment. with his team, and they went back a few times, and it's shown exactly what you're talking about. It makes me think that is that effort. I'm just I watched that recently, but it's just come out in the last month or two.
Oh, well, send me a link. I'll look at it.
I will send you a link. Yeah.
Awesome.
So one other thing you mentioned earlier, and this is before we get into other examples of precision and things. And I'd love to get your perspective, given your background as a precision engineer and understanding how precision relates to things like function. It's a point I try to make in my videos, is that we deal with precision on a daily basis. It's a term that gets used a lot. It's used in advertising. We do all these types of things, but it's at some point when we can measure some of the precision, for example, like flatness, things like the boxes in the Serapeum, or the precision shown by the symmetry of the Ramsay statues. At some point, that level of precision implies a couple of different things, right? It implies both just a sophistication in the tool set that must have been used to create these objects, and then I think when it comes to objects that you can argue that aren't necessarily, there's no arguing that a Ramsay statue is artwork at some level, but things like the boxes, and these boxes we find not just in the Serapeum but elsewhere. Yeah. The precision that's evident in the inside corners, the surfaces, the flatness, the overall geometry of the boxes, which we'll talk about, but just in general, the precision's relationship to function. I mean, is that something that I know you've you mentioned it in the books, but just your perspective on precision in general and its relationship to function is how important do you think that is? What does it mean?
Everything.
It does.
Precision is everything, and where you don't need it, you don't create it.
Right.
But in today's world, we have artifacts that are created with machines that don't need to be precise, but they are precise because the machines are precise.
Right.
Furniture, things like that.
Yeah.
But then when you go to the evolution of manufacturing and what precision means, if you were driving a car in the 70s, or you have a car from the 70s, and you look at the fit and finish of the car body itself, you will find huge gaps, right. Between the hood and the body, or the trunk and the body. Now, because of the evolution of manufacturing technology, those gaps have been reduced to a minimum. Right. And sometimes, I mean, it's remarkable when you see how precise the vehicles that we drive today are.
Yeah, I mean, everything from electronics on up. I mean, it's all done. I think it's a subtle point that I try to make as well, which is, you only develop the capability to get that level of precision because of function, or because it has some tangible benefit that is returned to you through optimized, efficiency, things like that. Like the example I love to use is, just semiconductor chip manufacture. I mean, we didn't spend however hundreds of millions of dollars it's cost to develop the ability to create, these complex electronic devices on a nanometer scale for any other reason than this optimization that gets returned to us. But then, as you say, like once we develop the process, that precise process, it then gets applied to everything else. And I think it's a good explanation for things like the Ramsay statues, is that clearly whoever built these had a process that was very precise, and they perhaps developed, it seems to me a logical extension that process was developed and the precision was developed because they were chasing a specific functional return to it, but then that process was then applied to other objects like these statues.
Yeah, and the statues are, and also the pyramids and the temples, they're like the skeleton of a civilization, and right. So we admire those, but you have to look beyond that, or through them, and see that there must have been many other objects that once existed that no longer exist.
Right.
That had the same precision. And when you look at the Ramsay statue, you can't create something like that with just as a sculptor.
Yeah.
And
right.
even the features on the statues, when you look at them very closely, they're not like a David or an ancient Greek statue or Roman statue. They're more. It looks like more like they were designed by an engineer, because you don't have the subtle features of a human face. And in fact, if you look at it as a challenge for an engineer to create a replica of a human face, and so you got an engineer on one desk and another engineer on another, and the engineer who is challenged to create an exact replica of a human face, a human body, with all the characteristics and flaws that you find in a normal face, you would have, and then you turn that data into machine code to machine it. You would have many pages more lines of code to create an authentic human face with all the characteristics of a flawed human being like you and I. Well, me anyway.
I'm certainly, yeah. Trust me, I'm not symmetrical in any way.
No, I'm not symmetrical. I've been called eccentric for sure. But
not symmetric.
But then the other engineer is saying, okay, we just want you to create a body and a head using the least amount of resources and code that you can generate. Well, you're looking at the Ramsay statues, because you look at the face. It looks perfect, and it is perfect in a way, too perfect.
Right.
And then there are other features of the statues, like the hands and the feet. They are they're absent knuckles. They don't have the features of a human hand with the knuckles. They're pretty much slabbed off in a way, very smooth. Same with the feet. And then, of course, they did some other adjustments in the Ramsay statue where they allowed for strength by lowering the elbows so that they met the thighs, thereby not having a gap underneath the arms, which would be a weak point. And then, of course, the false beard, and which provided support for the head,
right?
And then the headdress support this way. They're like what we call gussets, that provide engineering strength. So but then the geometry and the precision is something remarkable and very surprising to me when I discovered that.
Yeah, I love the description in the book of how you just were taken aback by sort of I think you first looked at the head jets and the crowns, and then started to like, well, hang on, there's all this obvious geometrical, I guess, precision that's gone into this and planning, and then it sort of led you into like, well, let's analyze all these faces, and the results are as you said, astonishing. I wrote that I enjoyed thinking about it this way. It's like, because I've had people, I mean, it's a natural response for a lot of people that watch it to say, well, David is a good example, or sculptors can do things like this. It's like, well, no, I see that the Ramsay statues are almost inhuman because of their precision, whereas things like David is beautiful and is incredible an achievement as it is. It's human because of its lack of symmetry. It's that's what makes it so human, and we relate to it.
Right.
And it's why you sort of look at these Ramsay statues and you definitely notice that there's something that strikes you about them that's just, it seems beyond human.
Yeah, well, when I was there with John Anthony West in 2006. Before that, I was there in 2004, and the crowns really interested me because they seemed unusually precise and smooth, and and so I pondered on. Well, they feel really precise. There's no waviness or dips or stuff like that. And then in 2006, I was able to photograph them and analyze them in my graphics program. So and found that the crowns were symmetrical, and so then I was like, well, I wondered about the Ramsay statue itself, because I remembered back in my first visit to Egypt in 1986, I was looking down the length of the Ramsay statue at Memphis in that open air museum. And I kind of remarked about the symmetry of the face and the nostrils. The nostrils appeared identical, and most people's nostrils are not identical. So that was kind of like a trigger for me. But I was there to study engineering in the pyramids, not art and statues and stuff.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's an interesting path, isn't it? It leads you right down it. Yeah, I was. What was I going to say? About the statues. The polish that you talk about, the smoothness and the finish on the crowns. This is also something that I've seen, and it's a point I try to make in a couple of different spots. They're not the only objects that have that kind of almost perfect finish to them. We see that in boxes. We see it on slabs. In some cases, we see it on other objects. And there's also, even in the museum, the smaller scale statues seem to have that, just an incredible polish that's on them, and this perfect sort of finish that's on very hard stone like granite or diorite. One of the things that I notice, and I don't know if you've made the same observation, is that say the boxes in the Serapeum, they're not all flat surfaces. They have the cracks have been hollowed out and removed from the boxes, so you have these divots, these almost eggshell shaped, where material's been removed, but those inside surfaces of those boxes are also, beautifully polished. Same thing on some of the statues. You get the inside of the fingernails are polished. All of the and it's incredible use of that polishing. There's some other statues of the lion sphinxes that that it's almost as if light has been used to show up the ribs that are on these things, but you don't tend to see that level of polishing in the writing that's on the objects. Often, if you take a look at the writing, you can clearly see it's been done like this with, hammer and chisel that's been put into it. And even in some of the larger bits of writing where there's gaps, say the interior of a bird glyph or something, it's not polished. They had the ability to pretty clearly polish non-linear surfaces, but you don't see it on the writing. It's one of the things that I look at with the writing, and I go, it's two different levels of technology that have been applied to the same object, and we date and relate these things by the writing. And to me, it's like, well, can we really do that? Is it not also possible that this writing came at a later period? It was done at a time of a different level of technology, that type of thing. I don't know if you've made a similar observation.
Yeah, I did, and I did so in my book, and also on site. In fact, it was great seeing you going around with Yusuf. And I
like Yusuf.
I remember in 2013 when I was with Yusuf, and we were between the paws of the Sphinx. Mm-hmm. And the Dream Stelae, or however you pronounce it. I was showing him how you have the different qualities of work, where the design, where you have the sphinxes, that seemed to have, and they were sunken reliefs, and you also have that all over Egypt, where you have these beautiful sunken reliefs. They're in the obelisks, they're in some of the benches that the statues are seated on, but and then pointing out to him the crude chisel marks, and then when we did the same in the Serapeum, looking at that, and so it's great now that the Egyptians are actually picking this up and running with it. You have Yusuf, he's a great guy. Yeah. Muhammad Ibrahim is now even going out in the field with his fellow tour guides and showing them and teaching them. And now my book is available at the Aswan bookstore and other bookstores around Egypt. So
that's great. That's great. Yeah, I get tremendous value out of both Muhammad and Yusuf. I've been lucky enough to spend a fair bit of time with both of those guys in various periods. I've interviewed them several times on it. Yeah, I think if anyone goes to Egypt, they're the guys to look up. If you want to hire a tour guide that's going to show you a very interesting perspective on Egypt and sort of challenge a lot of the established I guess assumptions, established stories about what you're looking at. They're the guides that they'll show you the magic of it. Like that's the other thing. I think that tourism could almost like Egypt would benefit from, and even Egyptology, if there was a bit more of admitting to some of this mystery, and that there is not all of it simply explainable just by saying, look, that it was all done with these primitive methods that we know about. No matter what the evidence says. I think if we were a bit more, and this is also, I draw the comparison to Petrie, because I think he understood that he was looking at something that was beyond, then even our known capabilities at the time. And I think if we could admit to some of that, it would probably help more interest. I mean, people would become more interested in Egypt and want to see it and sort of explore these mysteries for themselves, because it would probably grow tourism in the area. But
oh yeah, I mean a lot of the tours I've done in Egypt, there's been a lot of engineers, and I've talked to Egyptologists that run tours all the time, and they say every time they have an engineer in their group, the engineer is going, no, it's impossible. Yeah. They go to the unfinished obelisk, and no, it's impossible. It's impossible. You can't do it with the tools that you're describing.
Yeah, those are the people that always notice. It's the experts, it's the engineers, the construction experts, even stonemasons. Anybody that is familiar with what it takes to do some of these things I think they're the types of people that also, like yourself, that we should be acknowledging and listening to as having the expert opinions. I mean, it's just, I understand there's a little bit of with I guess mainstream Egyptology and archaeology, the desire to kind of claim the whole domain as their area of expertise, and certainly a lot of it is in terms of interpreting what was written and understanding the culture and how those people lived and their day-to-day lives and things is that's absolutely their bailiwick. But when it comes to constructing an 80-ton granite box that's sort of with precise geometry from a single piece of granite, I mean, it's construction engineers and manufacturing engineers that we should probably turn to.
Yeah, and you showed a video of was it Mark Lane and Dennis Stocks?
Yep.
Another guy that was on there was Roger Hopkins, who is a stonemason. But at the end of that, I was thinking to myself, I think rather than proving how the ancient Egyptians made these things, they proved how it wasn't done.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, in particular, like that's the point I tried to make with that detailed look at the tube drill holes, because there's been a lot of experiments. I know they did it at Pennsylvania, like University, Penn State in the 80s. They did a test as well where they drilled with various different lubricants, and you did a similar test, and then they took scanning electron microscope pictures of the cores, and it just doesn't look there's no doubt you can drill granite like that, and lots of people did, and lots of cultures did, but that doesn't match the evidence that we see on Petrie's core number 7, and I personally don't think it matches the evidence that we see in a lot of the existing tube drill holes that are in places like Abu Sir, Abu Ghraib. There's holes in Giza. They're everywhere. Karnak Temple. There's a huge one that's like 8 inches.
There are. I battled my detractors on the Petrie core number 7 for many years, and I debated online between 1995 and 2003, and then I just said, I'm not doing this anymore.
Yeah, fair enough.
It's just like
you can't.
I'm just going to continue my research.
Well, I see why. I mean, at some point, the argument becomes a bit redundant. In my opinion, you kind of close the case on it in your book, because I mean, ultimately, what you showed was that the whole mainstream, if you like, I'll use the term mainstream, but the mainstream resistance to that idea comes down, it ultimately boils down to photographs that are slightly tilted to try and give you the indication that these are horizontal striations in the drill core and not spiral. And I think the the desire to do that is kind of the part that's unsaid in a lot of the mainstream publications. It's because of what it means, and ultimately, I think when you analyze this evidence, it leaves them in an awkward place. I think you have to come to one of two conclusions. One is that, either we've dramatically misjudged the capabilities of the dynastic Egyptians, if they indeed did it, because we look at the tools that are in the archaeological record and in the museum, and we know that, based on this evidence, there's no way that you can make these objects or get that result using the tools that we know they had. So either we've misjudged them, or perhaps they didn't do it, and they may have inherited some of this stuff from perhaps a previous culture, which I find to be a compelling argument just based on a lot of the recent evidence, that's come up in the last 20 years around things like the Younger Dryas cataclysm. You can also look at what the Egyptians themselves said about their culture, like they inherited it as they called themselves a legacy civilization from their ancestors, and it's it paints an interesting picture, but it does in some ways paint kind of our mainstream archaeology theory into a corner. Like you have to go. It's that's why they can't, I guess, admit to that evidence. Is because you either misjudge the Egyptians or they didn't do it.
Yeah. Well, back to the tilted core.
Yeah.
I don't claim that they did that intentionally.
Oh, neither do I.
Yeah. I mean, I think they just didn't. They didn't take the extra step of making sure that it was on axis, and so it's a simple mistake to make, but for somebody who's worked in aerospace for many decades, it's kind of like second nature. Yeah.
Oh, I bet. Yeah, to align. Yeah, to put the right grid around it and to analyze it. Yeah, I said the same thing in my video. I said it's either it's either a mistake. That's quite possible, or it's just a deliberate kind of let's not go there, because I just noticed it doesn't really get addressed. It's difficult to get the argument even addressed in a lot of ways. It just doesn't. I don't know. It's hard to. Yeah.
But eventually, hopefully the truth will survive. And that has to be supported by good evidence.
Indeed, it does, and in fact, so we have some of that evidence, and I know there's the Petrie core, which has been analysed. I know you've done the work with the latex impression of that. I think that there's many other tube drill holes that have clear striations and what look like circular grooves to me that I think we should have analysed, and that's a different kettle of fish with getting permissions to do that type of stuff in Egypt. But what would be? It's a question I wanted to ask you is. What do you think is the next step? Like what, in terms of metrology and analysing this, given the current state of technology, what really is the next step to proving some of this? Because I think there's a lot of these little bits and pieces of evidence, and we've got a lot more modern technology today. What if you had a wish list of what we could go out and test on these sites? What should we be doing?
Well, I think you identified one of the methods that could be employed with laser scanning equipment. Inside the boxes, if you had an autocollimator or something like that, or a laser alignment system, you could gather a lot of information very quickly.
Right.
As far as the three-dimensional geometries, my simple two-dimensional photographs imply that there was three-dimensional perfection, but it doesn't exactly prove it.
Right.
All I see is a two-dimensional photograph on a computer screen, and I can draw a circle around the jaw and remark how symmetrical they are. And when you consider that the jaw is a three-dimensional, the outline of the jaw is three-dimensional, right? So it's an arc. I'm looking at an arc, but it's actually traveling in 3 dimensions, X, Y, Z.
Right. Yeah.
And right. So three-dimensional laser scanning equipment. Technology has moved on so much since I did my studies there, which was around 2006, 2000 to 2008, and then publishing my book in 2010. But what's available today, if I had access to that, that would be. I probably need a young guy like you who could actually operate it.
Yeah, I volunteer. I'd love to see it happen. Yeah, I think. Yeah, it's a possibility that I'd like to pursue. I mean, touch wood, we can make it happen. There are a few, I think, opportunities coming up, hopefully in the future that I've been privy to, that maybe we can try and test some of those theories out. Because I agree. I think that's the type of stuff that we should be doing to take it to, I guess, a new level of proof. Yeah, I mean, we should be able to create these sort of, and it's non-invasive too. That's the nice thing. We don't have to destroy anything to do this. It doesn't hurt anything, and it just benefits everybody. But yeah, there's the whole tube drill thing was just fascinating to me. It's probably the strongest smoking gun evidence of something that is just even today beyond our known real capability to because when you again look at the penetration rate into the granite, it's just an astonishing level. So do you have any? I know you do speculate in your book. I love the process of you kind of. Originally, you originally looked at like ultrasonic process, and then you almost dismissed the idea after you examined it, and then you speculate as to something like a thermal lance or heating of the granite. It's a question and a comment I get all the time, which is this idea of stone softening or melting, or somehow bringing like doing something to change the nature of the stone itself. Is that still an idea that you think is possibility? Like, is it something like? I guess my question is this explainable with technology as we know it, or do you think that the answer really lies kind of outside of our known understanding of it? I mean, as we go, we don't know everything about technology. We continue to learn more, but it seems to me that it's possible that some of these explanations may even lay outside of what we currently understand.
I think. The technologies that we have today, if there was a concerted effort to attack that question, and with enough time and money and talent to move it forward, I don't see why we shouldn't be able to answer the question. Okay. My feelings about the ultrasonic changed actually after I cut my own core, because ultrasonics is an abrasive process,
right?
And so the abrasive process that I used, what popped out of the hole in the granite was a core that had a kind of like a matte finish, a rough finish, like it was sanded naturally, right? Yeah. No polish to it whatsoever. The Petri core. However, if you look at it under a microscope on the flat layout, the latex impression of it, you see. Petrie described it as a drunken screw. Very, very colorful description. Yeah. But and certainly that was accurate. But it's not. I mean, it's not just the spirals that interest me. You have runs that go between the threads. Okay.
Right. Yeah.
And these are grooves that are a part of the process of drilling. Now, admittedly, I mean, those runs are discrete. They're about 100,000ths of an inch. Obviously, if you're looking at a tool going around 100,000ths per rev. But then such a what seems apparently such a rough. It seemed like a rough, ready process to pop a hole in granite as fast as you can, without care to fit or finish. Well, you had to have a certain diameter, obviously, yeah. But they don't care. You don't care about the shape of the core that comes out of it, or how it looks, or and you come up with something that has a burnished, almost like a burnished finish to it.
Right.
It's not rough at all. except for, just running your fingers down it, you feel the threads, the groove as you run your fingers down it. But the surface itself, I mean, if you look at it on the photograph, compare the original to the one that I produced, you have a sanded core, and then you have another technology. And because of the runs between the threads, I suppose, I don't know, but I propose that they're the result of heat, almost like a heat run, between them. And then, of course, the ripping out of the mica and other parts of the constituent of the granite. That's another kind of indication that it wasn't a discrete fine process like ultrasonics would produce, but something that's a lot rougher and a lot more efficient.
That is interesting, because that whole concept kind of leads me to another question related to drill cores as well as other parts of the world. But have you evaluated or looked at any of the other examples of tubular drill marks or drill holes that exist outside of Egypt? I can think of a couple of good examples. In particular, there's one in the Coricancha in Cusco in Peru.
Yes, I've looked at those. Yeah.
Do you think they fit the same?
Well, it's hard. It's very hard to evaluate that when you. It will be harder to get a latex impression of a hole than it is a core. Yeah. And when you go to Egypt and say you're at Abu Ghraib or Abu Sir, and you see holes drilled into granite, and they're just like half a hole.
Yeah.
Right. So it would be very difficult to determine
whether it's continuous.
You could do it, but you would have to have a setup, a protocol that would allow you to determine if a spiral exists on a half a hole.
Yeah, that's an interesting observation. I noticed the same thing. It's rare to find like fully formed holes. There are a few, but to me it seems like. Yeah. I think it seems like everyone that's, the thousands of years of primitive quarrying that went on these sites, I think they were looking for those holes, because quite often I noticed that on the backside of the same blocks, you've got those, distinctive sort of dashed marks of where they've chipped out and they've quarried the stone on the principle that they could split it along the axis of the hole. That's the result.
That was a great observation you made on that, because that takes me back to 1986, where I was on the Giza Plateau and I was going by the second pyramid on the south side, and you see a lot of examples of that.
Yeah.
And then when I went to the Cairo Museum, and I asked an Egyptologist there, well, where are the tools that built the Great Pyramid? And he took me to the tool room, right? You showed a photograph of the case where you have these copper chisels and stone axes or whatever, and then I said, well, these won't cut granite. What about all your granite artifacts? And well, for that you have to go to Aswan. And I was like, okay, if I have to go to Aswan, and he described the process, and so I went to Aswan. Of course, he had to take me over to the travel agent to get me a ticket.
And his kickback, yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, I went to Aswan. This was '86, and then as I was walking through that facility, there was nobody there. There's no structure there. All they had was the unfinished obelisk and some wooden stairs.
Wow.
Leading up to it. There were no ticket sellers. There was nobody selling trinkets or anything. Yeah. And now the place is flooded, right?
Well, yeah. Now you have to go through a little indoctrination process too when you go there. They make everyone sit down and watch the movie about how they did this with these diorite pounders. Right. Yeah.
Right, but back to those quarry marks that the Egyptologist wanted me to see, and you were referring to. You find them on the quarries at Aswan. And so, as I pondered that, I said, well, if these are original to the original builders, why would they quarry these thousands of tons of granite, ship them down the Nile 500 miles, install them on a pyramid, and then proceed to break them apart again? So,
yeah.
And so, but it seems to me that those quarry marks are typical from the Roman period. When the Romans were doing quarrying, you find them in Europe too.
Yeah, they're everywhere. It's steel tools, right? I mean, it's just they used iron and steel to dig out a hole and put some wood in there, wet it, split the block, and yeah, you see them on lots of things. In fact, you can see where they've marked out. I mean, there's a couple. I mean, Elephantine Island. There's just this beautiful couple of boxes on Elephantine Island. And on one of them, on this beautiful flat square surface, you can see where they've marked out, a millstone, and they were going to try and hack this thing apart to make a millstone. Yeah, it's as you I think you described it really well, which is you're looking at the skeleton of a civilization. We've lost so much over time. All these sites were used as quarries for thousands of years, and I guess when you're looking at a block that's got a nice flat surface on it, then it's a great target to go and make yourself a granite slab to go and put in somewhere else. You don't have to work this face. You can cut a piece off and go to town. Yeah, because it turns out working granite's difficult.
There's a point that I like to make, and when you go back to the Roman period, and they were great engineers and created some marvelous structures, and the time between the Romans and today. And how the tools have been improved over a couple of thousand years.
Yeah.
And then you go to the early dynasties, like the Fourth Dynasty, building the pyramids, and the Egyptian civilization was supposed to have lasted for 3,000 years. Yeah. And then the explanation for how things were created on day one of 3,000 years. Yeah. Is copper chisels, stone hammers, stone balls, sand, and wood. And then you fast forward to towards the end of the civilization. Well, what tools did they have to create these? Okay, so over 3,000, 2,000, 3,000 year period, the tools were not improved one bit.
Right.
According to the official story, right?
Yeah, right.
And it just doesn't make sense. It really doesn't make sense.
I 100% agree, and I like to use the Old Kingdom in particular as an example of just this is not how civilizations work. You don't start at the peak and decline like we build up to it. It's an astonishing gap. I know there was this sort of. There were periods of up and down inside of Egypt, but it's undeniable that the Old Kingdom and particularly the Fourth Dynasty, they're responsible for all the great works. I mean that's and there's a disagreement amongst Egyptology about how they or if they even quarried the granite. Obviously they did. I mean they made the columns. Columns are a whole other they twist my head, some of those giant columns and the lotus-shaped columns that are wider at the ends and they're all single piece. But
beautiful work.
Unbelievable, yeah. But. How else to make those except for the ability to quarry granite and ship it and then and work in it in some sort of effortless fashion. Speaking of the Romans, that's a question for you. It's something I've wondered about, and I wonder if you have a perspective on it. But the Pantheon in Rome has columns in the front of it that are giant single-piece columns. They're Egyptian columns. They came from Aswan, and it's Aswan granite. I'm not sure whether they were, because Rome has all the obelisks. There was quite an active process of shipping stuff from Egypt to Rome for quite a while. Yeah. And I wonder about whether or not these columns were taken from sites in Egypt and installed at the Pantheon, or if the other opinion is whether the Romans made it. Because if the Romans made those columns, that seems beyond their normal column making abilities, where they would do stack up rounds and things. And I look at those columns and they look pretty Egyptian to me. And I know they had a habit of bringing stuff over from Egypt and using in their constructions. But have you looked at those columns in Rome?
I have not.
Okay.
The obelisk, yes, and just the fact that those obelisks were so technically perfect that they saw that it would be better for them to actually lower them and transport them to Rome than to actually go to the quarry in Italy and quarry their own and then shape it and apply, the sunken reliefs.
Right.
But it's fascinating though that the obelisks that were taken out of Egypt and where they exist now. And of course, the Egyptians now, they want them all back.
Well, yeah, I understand the motivation. It does seem a little sacrilegious to me that they have a little cross on top of the obelisk at the top. I mean, it's all even repurposed today. Even the Pantheon's a good example again of something that I like to use that as an example of what may have happened. I favor the inheritance idea in Egypt, and you only have to look at our modern civilization and even the Romans as for examples of how we do that. We like to take objects, we integrate them into our culture. I mean, the Pantheon was a Roman temple to a Roman god. Now it's a Catholic church, and we put crosses on top of these obelisks. We inherit them and use them, and it's sort of human nature. So if I consider the idea of dynastic Egyptians existing for 3,000 years, and perhaps they got their start by inheriting some of these objects, I'm not saying all of it, but certainly some of it, I think, they would become a part of their civilization. And I put things like the boxes in the Serapeums and perhaps the giant, the Ramsay statues, things like that. That all becomes integrated into their civilization over time. At least seems plausible to me. It's always going to be difficult to prove that idea, but I think it explains some of the technological differences we see.
Yeah, well, I don't know about the Pantheon, more than me about that, but the fact that the Romans were exporting a lot of the ancient Egyptian artifacts that's obviously that's historical record.
Yeah, I mean the columns are at the Pantheon. They're confirmed as Aswan granite in origin, so they did come from there originally. But my opinion is that they've probably taken them from other sites and installed them rather than actually having fabricated them, because they look very Egyptian. They're single piece, just giant, with columns, and they're my other favorite example. These huge single piece columns in terms of quarrying and it leads me to another question, which is when you look at these huge single piece objects, particularly the ones that deal in complex curved surfaces. I mean, what do you have any? It's a speculation, I understand, but do you have any speculation as to the tools that could have been used to make this? Are we talking about things like giant lathes or 3D milling machines, or is it somehow a way of they just were very good at mapping their intentions onto a surface and then making that with sort of smaller tools? But because I look at them as like, man, if that column wasn't turned on a lathe, I don't know how they made it.
Well, I think they were. There's evidence that they were using massive lathes to create their artifacts. There's evidence of that in the Cairo Museum on one of the sarcophagus lids, or one of the lids that go on one of the boxes. Yeah. Generally, they have an arc that goes the width of it, and then there is a shoulder and these squared off end pieces on it. And you can see typical lathe marks in the corners where a tool would have dug in, and then as the lathe rotated, it kind of feathered out and became a little smoother.
That's the unfinished box where they were cutting the lid off. Is that the one you're referring to?
Oh, that's another box. I think it's alabaster.
Okay.
And it's in the main part. It's near where the Pyramidion is located.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I know.
Area. And then, then there are some holes that were drilled in these boxes on the end, or the lids on the end. And today, if we were to turn that in a lathe, probably do it on a vertical lathe, and use what we call a tombstone fixture to hold it, and so it has all the features of lathe work. And then of course Petrie described lathe work. I agreed with him, And those columns, the round columns, yeah, sure. Why not?
Yeah, yeah. It's I mean, yeah, and that's right, and that draws interesting conclusions as to the capability of the civilization that made it. Obviously, speaking of, I want to ask you. This is related to the tube drills and the technology. There's actually an interesting and a very interesting observation made by Dave Ditzel, one of my supporters on Patreon. He sent this in. Are you familiar with the box on Elephantine Island? There's this. It's not even a box. It's like a triangular shaped. I can show you a couple of pictures here if you like. Of the,
I'm familiar with that. It's, they call it a shrine.
Yeah,
and it's tilted on its back. I mean,
yeah,
and then it has kind of a pyramidion top to it.
Right. What I find interesting, or Dave pointed out to me, is that it appears that at the edge, on the inset edge of it, there's two holes, so that it's almost as if there was a swinging door or something put in there. And these holes are quite round and perfect. What's interesting is that if you consider how those holes were drilled, there's no room for any of the infrastructure that sits behind a drill to actually make that hole straight, because it's inset along the lip, and I have some pictures of that, which to me is like I don't really understand how they made those holes in that location, because it's either an offset tool of some type that they used to do it, but you couldn't have done this by some tool that's in line with that hole, because the rest of the box or the shrine is in the way.
Yeah, I mean that would demand further study, I think. What is the distance between the hole and the side of the box?
It's right on it. In fact,
right on it.
Yeah, I can really quickly try and do a little screen share here, and I will share screen. This one, start sharing, so you can see. It's actually this picture here. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that hole is on both sides, and it's basically directly on the edge, both edges of that wall, and that's like the long axis of the box on that inset lip. So to me that's like an interesting observation, because it's sort of, I'm not sure how you get equipment in there in that space to drill that hole.
Yeah, I think the first thing I would want to do, and I did not climb into that box because I wasn't fit enough, I'm ashamed to say. But the first thing I would want to do is find out whether the axis of the hole is parallel with the side of the box.
Right. Yeah, all I've got to work with is this photograph.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then, of course, you have a situation where you may use a right-angled kind of device where you can get really close to the side of the hole. Then there's another option where the size of the hole looks like to be about 1.5 inches, 2 inches,
something like that. Maybe a little bigger. Yeah, maybe 3.
So if you want to create a 2-inch diameter hole, and you would actually attach it to a smaller rod, like maybe a 1/2-inch rod or something like that. Right. So you create clearance between the drill string and the side of the box.
Right. Interesting. Yeah, I'm going to be revisiting this site myself in December, and hopefully I'll get the chance to take a closer look at it. We'll see how that goes. It's always a bit hit and miss when you hit these sites.
Oh, you're going in November, right?
End of November. Yeah. Well, touch wood that the world doesn't end between now and then, but we'll see what happens. So far, so good. We'll see. I mean, we put together a tour. I know you're doing one with NEXT as well. I'd love to be on that tour. Yeah. So it's I've been hoping to do that one for a while, but my first tour is going to be in December. It sold out really quickly, and I'm really pleased with how people are responding.
So you've got quite a following.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. I'm doing it in partnership with another channel that Ancient Architects with Matt. He's a great guy. But I'm looking forward to that. I had the chance to tour with Graham Hancock a couple times, and then it was on that tour that I met Yusuf, and then Yusuf just opened my eyes to the mechanical sort of reality, a lot of this stuff. He references you, of course, quite a bit. And every time now I go back to Egypt, it's like Yusuf and Muhammad. Either of those guys, I'm like, show me everything. And we're going to be touring with Yusuf. It should be a good trip.
Excellent.
Yeah. One other question for you about tubular drill. One other hole that I think I made mention to it when we were talking earlier. But are you familiar with the find of there's a jade bracelet that they found in Siberia it's around 40,000 years old, a Denisovan bracelet. It's a nicely manufactured jade bracelet, but it has a very small, what is a tubular drill hole, or it has a drill, maybe not tube drill, but it has a drilled hole through it that seems to have striations on it that indicates kind of a high rate of speed. I'm not sure if have you seen this object or you've heard of this?
I think I've seen photographs of it. Is that
I can show you.
It's in a set. It's broken, right?
It is. Yeah. Let me. I'll show you here briefly. This is it. This is it here. And I will share this in the presentation when we make it. But that's it there with the. You can see the hole, and they have a couple of good little. There's a close-up image of it here. Yeah, that looks. It seems to indicate relatively high-speed drilling, which is to me interesting. I mean,
the thing is that I've always tried to avoid commenting on just photographs.
Yeah,
because of things are not always as they seem when you actually go to the artifact and take measurements and get close up to it.
Okay.
So I tend to avoid speculating on that, but it does seem like it's evidence of fairly sophisticated technique.
Yeah, well, I mean, the whole object itself is nice too. Like just the shaping and polishing is. I mean, that's possible with primitive techniques, but this is like, well, this is interesting, and that opens up my mind a little bit to like, well, there's our not only have we been extending the Homo sapien timeline. We're now 300,000 years old. I think is the oldest example we have of Homo sapiens in the fossil record. With the find in Morocco, but we if we can start to apply some of these other technological capabilities to other of our cousins and other forms of humanity, then possibly the timeline gets extended further. Again, all speculation. It's all interesting stuff to think about, but it's I don't think we were the only ones capable of doing some interesting things, and it's
right.
Yeah.
Well, it doesn't surprise me anymore when stuff like that turns up.
Right.
And if but I would advise anybody to have do a thorough examination of it in terms of, is it perfectly round?
Right.
Is it the profile on the outside? Is it consistent all the way around? Right. That would take some additional work, I think.
Indeed. So I'm hopping all over the place in terms of topics here. I do have a lot of questions. One other thing that is interesting to me is we talked briefly about the idea of, well, there may have been a heat application in terms of shaping stone. I get that. That seems to be a common question or an observation that's made, particularly in reference to the non-linear construction that we find in places like South America, Peru, Bolivia, where you have these these incredible polygonal masonry walls that fit together, and in some places, like in Cusco, where in the granite walls, where you can see the blocks have been removed, and you get to see those mating surfaces between two blocks, and there's just these perfectly formed lips, and it's apparent that there's no gaps between these stones. Like it's a consistent two sets of curved surfaces that match exactly. Is that? I mean, again, it's hard to judge from simply just photographs and things, but is that? Do you think that's an observation of precision, or perhaps a process that we don't fully understand in terms of how these things were constructed? Because that, to me, it's kind of the closer you look at some of those walls, the more intriguing and sort of complex they become.
Yeah, and I think the way they're fitted together is amazing. I mean, it's a huge puzzle. When I was visiting there and pondering on the manufacturing methods, I mean, we're talking are they actually grinding a little bit off the top block and then lifting it up and seeing if they need to, and the idea that I came up with was perhaps they were actually fitting the blocks laying down.
Right.
And so they had a way of, rolling them in maybe on stone balls or whatever, but they were fitting the wall together horizontally, and then when they got everything set, then they built them vertically.
Right.
But the technique they used is that they only finished on the Saxo-Hawaman.
Yep.
They only finished the like half an inch at the front of the block. You can see it if you go to the top of the Saxo-Hawaman and start looking down. You'll see that they're tapered back. There is a relief where the blocks are tapered back. So they only fitted the front part of it.
Right.
And then you see where they had gone in later, and if there was any mismatch between the two blocks, the adjoining blocks, then they ground down the front of the block so that you had, a match.
There are, I know what you're saying with the taper at Sacsayhuaman. There are the walls in Cusco. There's the famous, it's the Inca Roka wall, I think they call it.
Yeah.
And there's a corner where there have been big blocks removed, and you actually can see some of those mating surfaces. And those seem to extend the full width of the block, and they're flat and seem to be really well finished to me.
Right.
Which is
I mean, you've got two different kinds of work in Peru. It's a real puzzle where there are extremely flat surfaces. And I went through Peru with David Childress, and he was looking for evidence of machining, right? Because and so going through Peru, flat surfaces, don't trip my trigger. It's like we know how to create flat surfaces by hand.
Yes.
And so arguing that a machine was involved, it becomes a little more difficult. But the surfaces were flat within the limits of my straight edge. I would say that.
Yeah.
You go to Pumapunku though, and you got a totally different class of work.
Yeah.
And those artifacts were obviously machined.
I have to agree. Yeah.
And I measured the flatness of the surfaces, and they were within half thousandths of an inch of being perfectly flat.
Yeah.
And it's mind-boggling in a way, because it's like, here you are up in like 14,000 feet up in the Andes, and right out of nowhere you got all these incredible artifacts, and it's like, what were they doing? And so I did a study of the H blocks, and one of the things that I did is when I went there in 2011, I wanted to measure the cavities side to side to see if the walls were parallel. Number one, to see if from one cavity to the next, in other words, the top cavity to the bottom cavity, whether they were identical, the same, and then go on to another H block and compare the results. Well, a lot of the drawings and illustrations you see of those H blocks, they show that the walls are parallel, but they're not.
They're not, right.
Right, they're dovetail. And so, that was an exciting find. I mean, it didn't... And also I measured the crosses on the back, where you have those protruding crosses on the back. And to see if those dimensions matched anything else, whether they would have fit into another cavity. There was evidence on the site, and I couldn't find any match at all there.
Yeah, that site really is something. I mean, Pumapunku Tiwanaku is definitely very unique anywhere in the world. It almost seems like, and if ever there was a place that seems like it's been constructed, machined, and had some sort of functional purpose, I mean that's it. There's one of my favorite blocks there is just this one sort of big square block that nice flat surfaces, but just has that tiny channel, like 1/4 of an inch wide channel with holes drilled in it exactly down there, just like you might see in a modern piece of anything that has that purpose, and precisely placed little tiny little drilled holes in the andesite. It's like
well, when I went there, I think it was in like 2005. I had taken some measuring tools, and as I went through Peru, and I really wasn't finding a use for most of them. We stayed in La Paz before we went out to Tiwanaku, and so I left my tools behind because I didn't think I'd need them.
That place. Yeah.
And then I walked into the Pumapunku, and I'm like, oh, slap my forehead.
Well, your work's inspired me to go out and start getting some of my own. Like that's a straight edge that I bought, and these things are expensive. Like all these proper precision tools are proper calibrated ones are pretty expensive. But I'm slowly.
That's not plastic, is it?
No, metal. Yeah, no, it's a.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, it's a
nice,
decently sized straight edge.
What's the tolerance? I
should have known that. I figured you might have asked me. I'm not sure. I'd have to look up the. I'd have to look up the tolerance, but yeah, it's at the lower end. Like I can't buy super expensive tools, but it's at the lower edge of. It is a calibrated straight edge, but not a super high tolerance, but certainly enough to analyze.
Now you need to go out and get a solid precision square.
Precision square is next for sure. Yep, and then some corner radius dies and things like that. I think there's some
radius gauges.
Yep. Yeah, there's a lot.
You were talking about that one block. That was the first thing that caught my eye, which caused me to take a taxi back to La Paz and retrieve tools. And then the following day, I went out and I did a study of that block.
Really?
And those holes are spaced, I would say, probably within 20 thousandths of an inch. It's not super precise, but the groove itself, I measured it with an indicator on an indicator on a gauge, right? A surface gauge. And I ran the indicator down the groove, and it was probably within about 10 thousandths of an inch of being out. Which, it's incredible. It's incredible work.
Yeah.
And when you look at how a machining process can accumulate error in terms of check the depth of the groove and the distance, or if you got some creep on the machine that's actually cutting it, 10 thousandths on andesite. I found that to be very impressive.
It is, yeah. I mean, it's just again, it's a case of like you just there's if you're. I like to use the example. If you're making something that's ceremonial, or it's a box, or it's just for ritual, then as long as you color within the lines, you're generally going to be okay. But you don't need that level of precision for any other purpose than function. So yeah, I think that site's it seems to have been subjected to some sort of tremendous damage that really flattened it and knocked it over at some point.
Exactly.
That buried it halfway in mud, but yeah, we'll likely never know exactly what was going on there. But it seems to me to be pretty functional. I mean, there are also some curved surfaces that are really interesting at Tiwanaku. There's a block there that it's actually on the Tiwanaku side that I call the super block. It's almost this, looks very like hydrodynamic or aerodynamic shape. It's got a lip under it, and on the back side, almost like a sluice gate or something that has these curved surfaces. But on the front of it, you have a collection of all these little holes as well that are on there, and then it's got some of the drawings and the symbology that it came from the Tiwanaku culture. The artwork is on it. So, yeah, that place is a real mystery. I like that place. I've spent like 4 or 5 days there as well. It's a incredible spot.
Yeah, I mean the engineering behind that site is absolutely incredible.
Yeah.
And even imagining what they were using the holes for, you can imagine. Well, okay, if they want to create a structure and then plate it with some kind of metal, silver, gold, or something like that, then those holes would be good to hold it, to secure it.
Yeah, it seems like they were doing that because you do have the key lock. There is plenty of like examples of key locking, and it's pretty square key locks on the blocks where it seems like they've used some form of metal. I'm sure all the metal's been, long since dug out and reused and claimed by people. But yeah, what was I going to ask you about that site? I did have so a question for you. Have you? Again, it's a question I get a lot, so I'm going to ask you. Is I have a lot of people that are you following the geopolymer discussion around some of that? Have you read any of those papers? So I'm not really on board in general with the geopolymer idea. I like it. I think we need more work, but there has been an interesting study done at Pumapunku or at Tiwanaku where they seem to have found some form of organic compound in the andesite, which is shouldn't be there based on if it's actual like andesite that's formed in the heat of a volcano. It would get rid of organic compounds, but it looks like, at least I saw one study that referenced perhaps finding some an organic compound in the stone. So whether or not it's been cast or something like that.
Yeah, there was. Oh man, that could take another hour to.
I know. Sorry.
I have some journal articles I'll share with you.
Okay, thanks.
And essentially these were written back in the 80s and 90s, and that's when Joe Davidovitz and Margie Morris were battling with the academia on the geopolymer theory. But and I wrote in my first book, my philosophy is that you can't really look at a building site and find one method of production or one method of manufacturing and then assume that everything that you see was done using the same method. Because that's not reality. Right.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah, I'm fairly skeptical about it too. I just it's interesting work, and I'm ultimately kind of waiting for somebody to, well, if that's the way it was, then figure out the formula and make something. I mean, that's ultimately the test.
Well, that's the question I had for one of the proponents of that theory, Margie Morris, and I asked her to just send me a bag of the conglomerate and with instructions on how to add the water.
Yeah.
And I mean,
I agree.
That's an engineer, right? It's like, okay, if you think your method is the method, then just send me the material.
Yeah.
Let me check it out.
Understood. Yeah, and it does. Even then, I know there's why a different mold for every different stone, and then it still doesn't explain the precision either. So even if you've cast the blocks, you still got to finish them and put the.
Well, there are some enormous problems with that when you get to looking at the geometries of the stone, where something that's made in a mold, generally you need to have a draft angle to release it from the mold. And when that draft angle is in the reverse, rather than, so he's going to lock everything in place.
Right.
Something, something will have to be destroyed. The mold. I don't know.
Fundamental issue. Yeah, it's an interesting. I can see how people struggle with trying to understand the walls. It's the other part that goes with that I look around and I don't know if you have any explanation for it. But there's there's global phenomenon of where you see it all over the world is these the protrusions and the knobs and things that seem to come off these megalithic walls. It's like one of these signatures. It's less
Right.
common in Egypt, but we still see it. Certainly things, there's some designed ones like the boxes in the Serapeum that were clearly used for lifting the lids. But you see it on a lot of rocks. It's almost as if they're unfinished and you have these protrusions coming off them, and it really is global. India, Turkey, everywhere. There seems to be anywhere there's megalithic walls. You don't have to look too far to find these knobs and
Right.
protrusions.
Right. Yeah. And I don't have a conclusive answer for that.
Yeah, I mean,
the thing is, it becomes problematic when you consider the proposed methods for lifting.
right.
The general accepted theory that blocks were dragged on rollers or something like that. But then the knobs, if you've got like a 25-ton lid that goes on a granite box, what are they lifting it with?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, it doesn't. The whole lifting rope theory doesn't make sense to me because there's just so many examples you can point to where the knobs are in completely the wrong place. They're way off the center of gravity. All you achieve is flipping the block over. Yeah, I don't think they're for lifting either. It's just an interesting phenomena that it's just like I can't really explain it either. It seems it
I don't
must have
know.
been a result of a quarrying process or however they've manipulated the stone.
Well, I think it had to have had some function.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that it's related to the final function, but maybe in the
process.
quarrying process. Yeah.
Yeah.
And if we go by the evidence in the Cairo Museum in terms of how they quarried these boxes and then shipped them with the lids, a part of the material, with the native material,
Right.
on the bottom. So can you imagine then that those lids that have the knobs now that are currently sitting on top of a box, were they originally on the bottom of that box?
Right. Yeah. You're right.
So, and then were those knobs actually more round?
Right.
And maybe that was
Part of it.
that was part of it. I mean, in manufacturing, a lot of the features that are created in a product through the manufacturing process are there to aid the next step.
Right.
So you may have parts that would have holes in them. Those holes would eventually disappear. But they were first created so that they could be located in, say, a fixture or a die or something like that at a following step. But ultimately, those holes are not disappear. They're removed before the part is shipped.
Yeah, that's an excellent yeah, that you're right. That is absolutely the process for manufacturing now. And yeah, there's no reason to suggest that they couldn't be part of that. But I won't keep you too much longer, Chris. I do want to. There's one part of all of this that is interesting to me that I see when you look at a lot of these sites, and maybe it's a result of the quarrying and the work that's in the later civilizations that have sort of used and abused these sites to some degree. But one of the things that I come back to the Serapeum because it's my favorite site there. To me, it's the one site that is almost from every aspect has a huge collection of smoking gun proofs of ancient technology. Not just the boxes themselves, but also their location, like how they were moved in there.
Right.
But it seems to me that at some point, now you've got the box that's in the hallway, you've got unfinished objects in places like in South America, and what looks like things seem to have been interrupted. Is that it's almost as if, and you can almost look at maybe some of these knobs that are still on these unfinished walls that never got there. It's as if there was an interruption that stopped whatever this process was. You see this on a lot of these sites. Things seem to be in situ. Is that? I don't. I mean, I guess it can line up with cataclysm or catastrophe or some event that paused all of this activity. But is that an opinion you said? Do you think we're looking at, unfinished work, or we're looking at something that was, perhaps just worked on and we just has been modified over previous later civilizations and thousands of years?
I do have an opinion on that. The my sense, my belief actually, is that because of the evidence, how we find it, and it's not just on one side, it's all over the place. Whether you go to Abu Ghraib, Abu Sir, Abu Ruwash, the unfinished obelisk, the Karnak temple, all the temples, but particularly evidence at the unfinished obelisk. And let's talk about that a little bit, because the conventional explanation for the why the obelisk wasn't finished and pulled out of the quarry is that it developed a crack.
Right.
Okay. And so, as a pragmatic, profit-driven engineer, I would say bullshit.
Yeah.
Because if I've just had a team of workers defining that piece of rock, and then it suddenly developed a crack, and I'd say, okay, well, obviously we can't use it as an obelisk. Let's cut it up into smaller pieces.
Yeah, you've done 3/4 of the work, right?
We've got all this work put in it. I'm not just going to abandon it, right?
Right.
And so then you have that. Then you go to Abu Ruwash, and it seems clear that to me anyway, is that the pyramid was actually in process. It was being built, and then something happened and it was abandoned, because you have a staging area for some of the casing blocks in granite, totally rough. They're just ready to be sawn into dimensional pieces and put in place, and they never were. And the entire chamber with that downward sloping shaft was never finished off, in my opinion.
Right.
And then you go to Abu Ghraib and you see these blocks that look like they were just thrown up and came crashing down. They got cracks in them, laying in there with in an awkward position. Like there's no way somebody took it upon themselves to say, "Oh, this block doesn't belong here. I think I'm going to move it here," and then I'll crack it in half in the process. So things like that, and then you go to Karnak and you have the obelisks at Karnak that were actually they had walls built around them to protect them.
Right.
And that leads to another question: whatever cataclysm was coming our way, did that ancient culture know about it? Did they knew it was coming?
Right.
And it seems to me, my sense is that they did. And so what you have is they were protecting some of their monuments. They buried a lot of statues at Luxor.
Yeah.
They, they surrounded their obelisks, and also started to build brick walls against the temple walls on the outside. Mud brick walls.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. For no apparent reason. And Egyptologists would say, well, that's part of the ramps where they dragged their stones up and put them in position. But I don't believe that.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of signs of really drastic destruction.
Yeah.
In Egypt.
Indeed. Well, in other places, South America too.
Yeah. South America too. Yeah. Totally.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, the whole South America. I don't buy for a second that it was the Inca created everything we see in South America within a span of about 250 years, and devolved in technological capability, because the big stuff's always on the bottom, and you've got all this rough work on top. Yes.
Well, then even at Pumapunku, you have evidence, and at the Tiwanaku pyramid, you have evidence of tremendous upheaval where these large blocks, huge blocks, are actually standing on pillars, mud pillars on an angle.
Yeah.
Oh, you know that the ancient builders didn't put them that way, right?
Yeah, no, yes. Yes, they've been pushed over or something. Yeah,
Yeah.
you have. I mean, I like to that whole area in Sacsayhuaman is there's some examples of like some tremendous big rocks that have cracked and fallen apart. There's these what look like staircases have been quarried into stones and they've been split. It's
Oh yeah.
there's
Those are remarkable.
yeah. I mean, it's an interesting field. I know there's a lot of debate. The whole Younger Dryas cataclysm scientific space is progressing nicely. There's a couple hundred peer-reviewed papers that I think I really look forward to the day that our historical and archaeological establishment pay attention to some of those papers and some of the findings. But in general, I'm also interested in the whole plasma cosmology model that seems to be emerging, and I know Robert Schoch's into this idea of with terrestrial lightning and some of the effects from really high levels of solar activity that can form these, that has a consequence of these giant lightning strikes that hit the ground that may explain some of the things we're looking at. I think there's a lot of options for things that could have happened to the planet in the past and may well, I mean, on a long enough timescale, will almost definitely happen to us again.
Right, and that's the thing when you're studying this field, and you're looking at that, and you're inexorably driven to that conclusion that there had to something happened in prehistory.
Yeah,
and the timeline for the building of these marvelous structures around the world has to be pushed much further back in time.
That's a very not good way of saying it. Yeah, and that's also the reason that I got into doing this. I think because ultimately, by looking through that lens of cataclysm and by sort of analyzing the past, I think the more people we can get interested in that concept, the more people can become aware that these are the kind of things that and this is altruistic and optimistic maybe, but humanity should be focusing on. Like this is. These are the threats that we should be paying attention to. Like this is ultimately that's the stuff that the more we learn and the more we prepare and the more we work together to ultimately get us off this one little vulnerable rock flying through the cosmic shooting gallery of space. That's the only way that we're going to survive as a species in the long term. I just if there was ever a mission for this sort of stuff for me that I'm doing, it's ultimately that message is to like, hey, let's focus on the stuff that matters and try to work together to get past it, because we spend a lot of time looking down at the ground and looking at quarterly results and fighting each other here, but ultimately in the long term none of it matters if we can't get together and figure out the bigger picture.
Yeah, that reminds me of was it Dante who said heaven wheels around us and still our eyes are cast on the ground.
Yes. Yeah, indeed. It's a good quote. Well, I think that's been great, Chris. Thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate you giving up some of it to speak with me today. As I said, I'm a huge fan of your work. I love it. I'm really grateful that I got the chance to speak with you. So thank you.
My pleasure.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Is there a way that people can find you on the internet? An easy way for people to find out more? Obviously, I'd highly recommend people that are interested go buy Chris's books. Lost Technologies of Ancient Egypt and the Giza Power Plant. Excellent books. I have them here. They're well thumbed and read, and just great material.
My website is gizapower.com.
Yep.
Not old gizapower.com. Giza.
Yeah.
GIZAPOWER.com.
Yeah.
And there there is a link to Adept Expeditions. For my tour with Next NEXT in September. And then there are several pages of photographs of Luxor, the Ramsay statue, Abu Rawash, the Temple of Dendera, which is another miracle in the desert. Oh, my God.
We didn't get to discuss that even today, yeah.
No, I know, but that's definitely worth a discussion.
Yeah, well, maybe in the future, if you're willing, I'd love to sit to do this again at some point and talk through some of these things. If you're willing, that'd be fantastic.
Yeah, I'm more than willing.
Cool. All right, good.
Sure.
It's good to
I've
know.
only got a few more years left, you know.
Well, let's hope
So
it's plenty. Let's hope it's yeah. Let's hope that yeah.
if I can
Yeah.
get if I can get another decade in, I'll be doing okay.
Fantastic, Chris. Yeah, well, let's hope. I'd love the chance. That's great, and I will follow up with you to do that. So, but thank you very much for your time today.
My pleasure.
Well, there it is. I very much hope you enjoyed that podcast. And once again, I really want to thank Chris for taking some time to speak with me today. I got a lot out of it, and I hope you guys did too. Stay tuned for a little bonus footage that I recorded from before we actually started our conversation. But before that, I really wanted to say just a huge thank you to everybody that does support the channel through the value for value model, be it through Patreon, PayPal, or through Subscribestar. I gave my supporters early access to the raw footage from this podcast a few days ago, so if you're interested in those sort of perks, or if you're just interested in supporting the channel and my work in general, you can find all of the ways to do that at unchartedx.com/support. I also wanted to thank a couple of people that have made use of my PO box that I've opened up recently. You can see the address to the PO box right down here. It's PO Box 5644 in Auburn, California, and the postcode is 95604. Yeah, I got that right this time. I messed it up in one of the other videos. I really wanted to thank Robert Pollock, first of all, for sending me this just beautiful little book from the 1950s on Tiwanaku. It's a wonderful little book. It's called Built Before the Flood, The Problem of the Tiwanaku Ruins. It includes some maps and foldouts, and it's one of the books that he's had for quite some time, and I really just want to say thank you. I appreciate it's a very kind gift, and I will be using this in some of my research coming up. I'll be combining it with my Poznansky volumes. I also wanted to say thank you to Bard Madsen for sending me his book. It's called From the Deep Ocean Above, Mankind's Unheeded Message to Itself. It's just an excellent collection of all sorts of research that deals with kind of all of the, I guess, echoes from the past and mankind's message that we've left to ourselves from, older cultures that spread across all of religions and time. And it's a really great research resource, and I will be using this in some of my work going forward. I also wanted to say a big thank you to David C. Anderson for sending me a couple of his books. In particular, it's this one, Where Angels Fear to Tread, My Life in Medicine and in Minding Other People's Business. It's his autobiography, and he wrote me a little note in here saying thanks for all of my interesting contributions on UnchartedX, and in particular he made reference to another book of his that he has sent me. It's just a beautiful book. This is Hongshan Jade Treasures, the art, iconography and authentication of carvings from China's finest Neolithic culture, which kind of deals with all of the different jade and sort of Neolithic remnants from their culture. It's just a beautiful book with all sorts of full color plates in it. Takes a look at some of the technology that's involved with carving some of these things. It's a really interesting book. I'm very much looking forward to getting into it because, I think the whole Neolithic part of China and the parts of China that existed before, I guess, the current civilization that's still going, China's the longest running civilization on the planet. I think there's a lot to explore there and find, and I think books like this provide an important link. So thank you to those guys who sent me that stuff through the PO box, and for everyone else, I'll see you in the next video. Cheers. What else? I don't know if you had any other questions for me, just let me know. Otherwise, I'll just kick it off.
Yeah, I was interested. I mean, you had an excellent grasp of the subject matter, and I'm curious what your background is as far as how you can understand, have that level of understanding.
Well, thank you. Yeah, so I've only been doing this particular. I've had an interest in it for a long, long time. I've been trying to do this full time for about 3 or 4 years now. This channel that I have now is about a year old, but I've been preparing for it and researching full time for quite a while. But my background is IT, specifically though the technology side. I was for a long time, 20-year career, mostly with Hewlett Packard, and I ended up in the chief technology office, the CTO office, and I think this helps me a lot in terms of understanding technological growth and what I used to do was integrate and evaluate sort of the wide field of technology developments and various technologies from chips through software and overall sort of orchestration in things like data center and cloud. and I sort of put all that together. So a lot of what I was doing was evaluating this wide field of stuff and seeing how it all fits together, and trying to help steer our R&D investments going forward. So that's I tend to understand things pretty quickly and try to put them in the context of the broader picture. So I think that's helped me with this.
The other question I had was your narrative proceeds very smoothly without stumble, and I wondered if you prepared a script.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I don't.
Okay.
I wish I could talk that well, in real life. I do tend to stutter and stammer a little bit in live situations like this. So please excuse me if I do that. I'm guilty of doing.
No. I mean that to me, considering how other documentaries come over, I think that is probably the best idea, and it's a really good format.
Thank you.
So yeah, well done on that.
Thank you. Yeah, I do write everything. I mean, most of my effort goes into writing, and I spend most of my time writing and writing script. In fact, I am planning on writing a book. And a lot of the stuff that it comes out as the videos is essentially from chapters of a book that I am working on. But yeah, that's the intent. I definitely script almost all of it down to the word, and then I read it and edit it, and it's just an exhaustive process. I should get a little better at doing things without so much effort, but this is the niche I found myself in on YouTube, and I think it's a good one, which is these highly produced kind of things that are well researched. I've got a lot of more footage than I've had a chance to share in these videos, and I'm going to get to. I'm going to get to those eventually. I've got a lot of things in the pipeline. So cool.
Yeah. Well, I can imagine you're a popular guy.
Well, it's growing. It's growing nicely. I am trying to make it what I do for a living. If it does, I mean, I may have to go back to work at some point. We'll see. But so far it's working out. In fact, you know, it's always surprising and gratifying the amount of support that I get from people that watch, because I mean, you can monetize YouTube and do a bit of that, but I mean, most of my support comes directly from people that I frame it in this value for value model idea of like, if this is worth something to you, much as like people pay for a subscription to cable TV, all that sort of stuff, then you know, it's still free content, but I'm amazed at how many people do sort of respond to that and support me through Patreon and all those other mechanisms. So it's still closer to minimum wage than anything else, but I enjoy doing this, and I'm glad that I have the opportunity to do what I enjoy. And try to make a living out of it. So,
excellent. It's hard. It's sometimes hard to maintain that level of passion.
Yeah, I bet. And I'm amazed at you. I mean, you did all of this while working, right? And we'll talk. I guess we can talk about it in the show too. But it's yeah. I mean, I'm always impressed with people like you. You maintained like a full-time and I'm sure very busy career while at the same time engaging in this passion and writing books. I mean, that's just. Yeah, I don't know how you found the time to do a lot of that, Chris. That's really impressive.
Well, I have a very patient wife.
Yeah, something we share, I think. My wife also has to put up with. She calls herself like she calls herself like a widow to the stones, because I'm just always looking at rocks and stones. She's just like, yeah, he's off looking at rocks again.
He's off getting stoned again.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Cool.